Following various secular channels and recently being introduced to Alex O'Connor, I decided it is appropriate to make a response to things. One particular video caught my eye lately, as the comments are essentially chanting Alex's victory over the Bible via his debate with Dinesh. I decided to make a point-for-point response, so I'll read here my notes on the subject. Here is my video in response to the debate between Alex O'Connor and Dinesh. Dinesh starts with the statement that the scribe receives a supernatural vision. This is predominantly false, since the prophets spoken of in the books are typically not the scribe who wrote them. This is obvious from the language used, such as Isaiah went into the prophetess, or Samuel cried all night. Clearly the prophet is not the author. Alex asks if the scribes get anything wrong. This is a deep question, as we have to ask which scribes. There is clear historical and scriptural evidence that the later scribes wrote additions to what the prior scribes wrote. Additionally, direct statements such as Jeremiah 8 verse 8 state that the lying pen of the scribes had made the law a lie. Clearly, it was accepted that there was corruption due to scribes. Whether there was an original, trustworthy scribe also has evidence on the contrary for many portions. Peter, for instance, states as recorded in the homilies of Clement, that Moses spoke the law by word to his 70 or so people, and foreseeing that the people of Israel would go into captivity, did not have it all written down. Then scribes who were not prophets wrote much down, not foreseeing that the law would be corrupted in the 400 or so years that it went missing. Alex is clearly unaware of these things. Alex O'Connor then claims that Genesis 1 is mythological. Genesis 1 clearly does not portray itself as mythological. He then moves on to Revelation, suggesting that it is mythological, and yet completely misunderstands the context of these passages. He is taking them in isolation, not understanding that we were given a precise interpretation in the prophets, namely Daniel. The 10 horns I directly stated to be the kings of the fourth beast, Rome. The lady that sits on the beast, as well, has precise details about her that perfectly match with Jerusalem. The double punishment matches Jeremiah 16. The items attributed to her match the items in the temple in 1 Chronicles 21. Being drunk on the blood of the saints matches what Jesus said about Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets. Being the harlot is what Isaiah 1 describes about Jerusalem. Alex does not understand the context. It is a mystery because it requires discernment of the righteous. Dinesh, similarly, lacks this discernment and lacks a knowledge of the scriptures, applying fanciful interpretations to these scriptures rather than the methods clearly, directly given to us in the scriptures. Alex, then, mentions contradictions within the gospel accounts. Sure, contradictions exist. Even so, Alex clearly is unlearned about what the actual contradictions are. He claims that Matthew and Luke contradict each other in that Matthew shows Jesus going to Egypt and Luke shows him presented at the temple. What he doesn't seem to know is that the temple dedication would have happened when Jesus was 8 days old. As for the time of circumcision, yet he would have gone back home. Not until the slaughtering of the people in the land the slaughtering of the people would have been at about 2 years old. Luke portraying him going to Jerusalem doesn't contradict the account that he went to Egypt, since he would have fled to Egypt at a later date. Even so, there are contradictions in those scriptures which I covered in my video testing Matthew 2. There are many various contradictions. Actually, I'd go even further and say I don't really trust anything Luke says as a reliable account, since he never even knew Jesus. But that is another subject. Alex wrongfully interprets this as it entirely being fictitious, however. There are various records that the Gospels were corrupted. Eusebius, for instance, records that each group has their own corrupted version of the Gospels according to their various biases. This doesn't mean that the history is fictional, but rather that it takes keen judgment to determine what the original version was. Dinesh isn't dealing with the information at all, and is feigning ignorance to contradictions. Dinesh then claims that the Jews are the biblical literalists and the Christians are metaphorical readers. He's actually right, but this doesn't work in his favor. The prophets gave very clear and precise descriptions. such as predicting that Jesus would be killed exactly 483 years after the commissioning of the reconstruction of Jerusalem, 445 BC, by King Artaxerxes in 360-day biblical years, as per the Genesis account of the flood's month and days. They very clearly portrayed the judgment happening over a 7-year period after the Messiah was killed, 66 AD to 73 AD. Then the resurrection and the reign of the righteous. Now we branch into another topic of whether our history is reliable or not. Revelation was written in a way that very clearly points to the words of the prophets, for those who actually know the scriptures. And it was even directly stated by Jesus to happen within 1 generation of his time of his death. Christians, indeed, point this as mythological because they really don't know the scriptures. The followers of Jesus were not originally called Christians. The Ebionites, meaning poor, and Nazarene, I believe it was of the branch, were Jewish converts that sold their homes and distributed their wealth to the poor while keeping the law outside of what they deemed corruptions, namely sacrifices and flesh-eating. They were essentially treated as Jews by the later pagan Christians, while the Jews treated them as Christians in that they embraced Jesus as Messiah. It was a real mess that they were caught in the middle of. They all took these things literally, but Christianity became a largely Roman movement that could not accept that the prophecies of wickedness applied to them and the teachings they followed. Therefore, they made it all metaphorical to dodge the implications of the text being taken literally. Dinesh then refers to Jesus saying, "This temple will be destroyed and raised up in 3 days." He claims that Jesus is talking about his body. Alex claims that Jesus doesn't say it is his body. He is technically right, but he did state that he would give the sign of Jonah unto his unbelieving generation. Given that Jonah was in a watery tomb for 3 days, the interpretation should be quite apparent. Likewise, since Jesus said, "This generation will see all these things, including the destruction of the temple, where not a single stone would remain," it is clear that he didn't mean the physical temple when he said that. Alex then demands a clear interpretation from Dinesh as to whether he would undermine the credibility of Luke. I actually support the disregard of Luke on the basis that he wasn't a witness, and even worse that he was an associate of the pagan Paul, but Alex doesn't do well in proving this. Dinesh then appeals to Abraham's command to sacrifice Isaac, claiming it is a depiction of Jesus to the Christians. This is a rather complicated discussion, since the prophets clearly stated that the sacrifices were never commanded, and that it was their service to a pagan god or pagan gods that led to these things. Take Jeremiah 7, for instance. "I did not command your fathers concerning sacrifices, but they went after their stubborn hearts." Likewise, Isaiah 43. "You didn't bring me your burnt offerings and sacrifices. You did these unto other gods. I did not lay this burden upon you." And additionally, Isaiah 1. "I do not delight in the blood of bulls, rams, and goats. Who required this trampling of my courts? I will not listen to you when you pray because your hands are full of blood." Keeping this in mind, it is hard to point to this foreshadowing Jesus on the basis that it was actually taught as wickedness by the prophets. Even Isaiah 66 says, "He who kills an ox is as he who kills a man, and he who kills a lamb is as he who kills a dog. They delight in their abominations, so I will cast them to the nations." With that in mind, I find it hard to justify the Christian interpretation, although James uses it as evidence of works justifying your faith. Alex then claims that John placed the crucifixion before the Passover meal, contrary to the Synoptic Gospels. At this point, it just looks like he is blatantly lying. What it says is this, John 13. "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper." John then describes the events during the Passover and after the Passover meal. There is no contradiction in this regard. Alex then argues that the Gospels are written after the events of 70 AD, and therefore the predictions of Jesus could be added after the fact. This is a lazy argument at best. Jesus wasn't the first to speak of these events. The precise details were described in the prophets, that there would be 10 kings of Rome up to the destruction of Jerusalem, Domitian was number 10. The fact that there would be a 3.5-year period of war leading to a 3.5-year period following the destruction of Jerusalem for great suffering is exactly as happened in 70 AD, yet these predictions are found in the book of Daniel. That Israel would be under the rulership of Babylon for 70 years was predicted by Jeremiah, and is the foundation for the 490-year prophecy of Daniel 9 that ended with the temple's destruction. Claiming that the Gospels were written after the events to describe them is ignoring the fact that they were previously predicted by the prophets. Additionally, our current Gospels are known corruptions that the Ebionites rejected. They specifically rejected them because they were corrupted, holding to their Gospel of the Hebrews. Although we only have a few quotations, they existed within the 1st century. The exact extent of the corruptions is unquantified, but we have many different texts from various locations, even various Gospels, that show slightly different variations of what happened. We have the Gospel of Caledy, recording events about John the Baptist that describe details of the Essenes that a later scribe wouldn't have known unless these are records from around that time. The descriptions of Josephus, matching Daniel. Emperor Tacitus, writing details spoken of by the prophets while being a pagan, etc. To say this is a later scribal forgery is to dismiss the abundance of other evidence. I completely agree that there are many scribal corruptions and additions to the New Testament. See my channel for reference, and I'll continue adding. I'd even say the vast majority of the New Testament is pagan doctrines. The early Messiah followers rejected Paul as an apostate. But that doesn't discount the prophets and many witnesses to the events that matched historical prophecies. Thank you for your time.